MnDOT project, principal project manager assigned to this project, as well as Derek Schmidt of WSP, who's the project consultant on this project, that are in attendance and here to provide council with an update. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ed.
All right. Well, thank you for having us. It's the first opportunity that we have to formally give the council an update here. So I appreciate you having us. So yep, I'm Eric Schiller, the MnDOT project manager for the 371-210 grade separation project. The way we have it labeled tonight, you'll see it called different things. And I have Derek Schmidt, who's leading our design team that MnDOT brought on to help us work through this project. So. I guess first of all, what I want to do is, I mean, most of you are familiar. I know you're all familiar with the intersection and its configuration as it's been for the last 25 years. What was working well 25 years ago is now suffering, increased congestion, intersection delay, and certainly a high number of crashes. Those are some of the things that we talked about in our September open house. So just kind of in review, so those are some of the top needs for the project. Something like 217 crashes in a 5-year period at that intersection, with another 240 or 238 crashes at each adjacent intersection. So when you put that together, it's over 450 crashes in a 5-year period in and around that intersection. I think that's largely why a project like this is rising to the level of statewide significance and being funded by the Corridors of Commerce program. So I'll just start with an update of what we've done since some of those initial announcements. So some of these you'll be familiar with. In June of 2022, there was a MnDOT, Crow Wing County, and City of Baxter partnership to look at feasibility options for that intersection. And that was important because some of that high-level early study led to, again, the funding of this project under the Corridors of Commerce project. That was announced in July of 2023. So what that allowed us to do is actually get into and further study this project. So that allowed us to put out an RFP, select a design team, start gathering survey data and other project data, and start getting some of these things that have been identified as project needs or frustrations and things like that, but getting some data behind it so that I can report numbers like that in open houses as to, it's not just a feeling, but what these are the needs that have been identified and now documented to further development. So we've had the opportunity to establish some technical advisory committee meetings. We just had one today. We've got Brad, Trevor, and Matt from the city helping us out with simple things, as this would be a good time to have an update meeting with the council. So those, and then also just working through things as we continue project development. We've got other agencies and then working with us monthly on that. So where we've been, we had the September open house at our headquarters, where we largely focused on those documented needs, getting those out in front of people, discussing what the trade-offs, challenges, and needs are associated with this project. This one isn't easy. It is a challenging project with both the two high volume roadways, but also with BNSF Railroad poses a significant challenge for grade separating the intersection. So, all things we'll continue to talk about here as we move forward, but developed that purpose and need. We're developing that in that first, certainly brought some of those things to the first open house. We did a value engineering study, and we'll talk more about that in the presentation, but really the way that we were able to schedule that value engineering study really got us to where we are today, where we're actually start to begin screening down a number of alternatives so that we can really get into our alternatives development and get something to look at. So that's kind of where we're at today. Where we're going, we'll talk a little bit about where we're going here today, just so you all have an idea of kind of where our transportation process and decision-making process would be, and then where ways for the city can participate in that. Where we're at today is just taking this universe of alternatives of everything that could be possible to solve the needs at an intersection like this, trying to get that down to something that we can study. So we're calling that our level 1 screening. Those will move into level 2 evaluation, so that's where those are further modeled, further studied, fully drawn up in a way that we can evaluate them against each other and against a no-bill condition of doing if you did nothing. And that process will lead us to be able to identify a preferred alternative, which we're looking to do here in this spring, and then eventually the city of Baxter will have municipal approval opportunity over that project layout that we developed. So we're targeting now this, the funding announcement was for 2028 construction, so that puts us at a letting for a project like this in November, the season before construction. So if it feels like this schedule is moving fast, it's moving fast because those are the constraints that we're given. This was announced for 2028 funding. We need to, there's a lot of steps that have to occur after this. So that's kind of what's put us on our time schedule. In the background, something that maybe isn't clear, the Quarters of Commerce program is generally state funded. State funding for a project like this. This project also has federal funding. All the funding sources haven't been identified yet necessarily, so this will go through the federal environmental document process, environmental study and decision-making process. You'll see that's really largely the things that we would do anyways. In identifying purpose and need, identifying evaluation criteria, evaluating alternatives against each other, and arriving at a preferred alternative are all the things that we would normally do, but we'll have federal highway with us on that. So they're going to want to see those concurrence points with us and make sure, like right now we're going through one where the purpose and need alternative, the purpose and need that we brought to the open houses and things like that we have documented in reports, those are also now under review at federal highway for their concurrence. So I don't need to get too deep in the weeds here. If you're interested, you can go further on it. But so this is generally how that schedule of their approvals and that decision-making process, how that overlays with the schedule that I presented as in our upcoming milestones. They're largely the same, right? So we've developed a purpose and need and how things should be evaluated and things like that. Just based on the needs that we've heard about and now studied. So those things have been formalized into a report that's being reviewed. They'll be looking at our evaluation criteria, things like crash reduction, improvement, and intersection delay, things like that, those types of things that address the project needs. They'll be looking at those and concurring with those. That'll happen here right before we roll into our second open house. That's something that needs to happen as we move through the stages of public engagement and working with you all. So, and that's in the end how the preferred alternative is documented is through that process, an environmental document. Late spring here. So I brushed over it pretty quickly, but how we come to that universe of alternatives, as we're calling it, that's anything that we've heard about from either early feasibility studies, public engagement opportunities that we've already conducted, anything that just seems to rise to the top as far as the engineering team looking at these things. This is sort of that stage where we want to get everything out on the table and then start dismissing the ones that just don't work, have fatal flaws, don't address the needs, whatever that may be. So in a project like this, you have a value engineering study that's required by cost. The cost of the project is large enough that it's required to have a value engineering study. There's a couple different ways you can use a value engineering study like that. You can, they don't really dictate when that needs to happen, so that could be something that you could be further along in design and conduct a value engineering study, and that could just be something that adds value that typically reduces cost or adds value in some way. On this project, it seemed to make sense to use it early. Let's get everybody looking at this and see if we can jumpstart the alternatives process and see if we can get other engineers that aren't on our design team, other folks that will be involved in that process. I'll pass it off and Derek can go through it in more detail, but essentially you get locked in a room for 5 days with a bunch of engineers, and you look at every which way that you could add value to something like this. So we thought that was a good way to get us going here, and it really did. It resulted in a lot of good ideas, a lot of good brainstorming. But then that's part of where we're at now too. It's like, okay, so we've got to kind of narrow the funnel because it's impossible to study the universe of alternatives in detail. It's not economical to do it. So that's kind of where we're at. Is leading us into, we've sort of taken everything that we've received to this point. We're screening it into something like 5 alternatives that we think are warrant further traffic modeling, further study, further geometric design development. And those are the things that we want to move forward into the next open house and further engagement. So, yeah, and then ultimately those, right now we'll be moving those alternatives forward then that we'll start talking about here tonight. And then ultimately one of them will be selected based on that evaluation criteria of how well they meet the needs. So, I'll pass this one to you.
Thanks, Eric. Again, my name's Derek Schmidt from WSP. Members of the council, thanks for having us here to give this presentation. So I'll get into a little bit more detail what Eric was talking about. So starting with the value engineering study, he is right. We did lock 12 engineers in a room for 5 days, and it was a more riveting conversation than you can imagine. Most people will joke about that, wonder if we even talked the whole 5 days, but that's what my wife says. So it's always very productive when we do these value engineering studies. I really enjoy doing these early on in the process because you get the creativity. We don't have a selected alternative, and we do. Sometimes we already know what we're doing, and we're just nitpicking a few dollars here and there. But this really let us think about everything we possibly could at this intersection. And I've been doing geometric design for over 25 years, and this is one of the most challenging ones I've ever done with the way the road is configured, the railroad, and where it's at. It takes a lot of alternatives that you normally would apply to this type of intersection and throws them on the floor because they just don't work vertically and horizontally. So this was good to have this. We came out of that PE study with 10 unique separate alternatives that hadn't already been previously identified in the study and other internal discussions. So we added that to our list, and as we came out of that, and there's a formal screening process. This is done by a licensed facilitator by the FHWA. So we use that screening process and carry that forward of these alternatives and how they address the needs. So now that that's complete and we have that, we go into level 1 screening. There's a lot of information up there. It's a lot to take in, but this is what we go through. So at this level 1, as Eric said, we take the full gamut of everything we've heard. We don't predetermine we're going to eliminate something just because we know it's not going to work. We put it in here, and we evaluate it against the true needs for the project. So we have 3 primary needs, which are safety, mobility, and access. There's secondary needs, walkability, bikeability, and then the pavement condition, and then we also have fatal flaws. So you can see up there each category. So for safety, with the alternative, eliminate conflict points resulting in the most severe crashes. So The existing intersection today, everyone's familiar with it, you make an eastbound on 210, you make a left to the north, very high volume, lots of conflicts that happen there. The volume of conflicts drives those crash numbers that Eric talked about. So how does each alternative improve on that against the existing condition? So we run through each of these scenarios and give it a score. We do a qualitative and a quantitative analysis on each of these questions and how they meet the needs. And so one thing I'd like to note here on the mobility and access, there's two sub-questions there. One related to mobility of 210 and 371, and one related to mobility of the local roadway system, which is obviously very integral to this whole intersection, moving around in a commercial environment like it is. We want to evaluate these alternatives and how they handle both the mainline mobility and the local mobility, and then also likewise for access. From MnDOT's perspective, our access management guideline is a formal document. We have certain intersection spacing. That criteria would be evaluated against that. For the locals is how much access, direct access to the local streets remains with this preferred alternative, or not preferred, but the alternative that we're evaluating. So, and then we have to note on the fatal flaws. So a lot of these alternatives that when you brainstorm, think outside the box and throw everything at the wall, you're going to have some alternatives that have major fatal flaws, and we cut those out. So if you have an alternative that costs $250 million, that's a cost fatal flaw. We're never going to be able to afford to build that. So we will eliminate that during the level 1 screening with a fatal flaw. Or geometrically constrained. One of the alternatives that came up was raising both 210 and 371 so you get over the railroad, but now your 371 is going to be over 50 feet in the air. Geometrically, not feasible, and so they get eliminated. So that's our level 1 screening. The goal of that is to screen that down to, whenever I do these, we're looking for around five alternatives that you're going to go to the next level with. So again, it's not intended for you guys to analyze this just to see what happens. So we have the alternatives on the left. There's some of the alternatives. They get scored. The green ones, as part of this, would move forward. The red ones would drop off. So as part of that level 1, this is where we're at. As Eric mentioned, we have narrowed this down. We have 5 alternatives that have risen to the top. And then the last bullet at the bottom, I always note there's always potential for more as we work through this. I've done a lot of these projects where we get to the level 2 and someone has a really good idea, and that's the one that ends up getting implemented. So we always leave that door open that there are other ideas or other subsets that might come out of this as we work through it. So I'll just touch on what they are. I'm not going to, at the end, we can kind of show the graphics if you'd like to see it, but we've got a button hook interchange with roundabouts, we've got a quadrant interchange, a folded diamond interchange, diverging diamond interchange on 371. Now that's the one that has also come forward from that study, that previous study that came out of that. And then we have a single point interchange with and without a signal at Excelsior. So that 5th one is the one alternative that does allow geometrically for a signal at Excelsior. The other ones do not allow for that. They provide local access in a different manner. The last one is our guidelines and design standards, both at FHWA and MnDOT. We need a 3% grade or less in our queuing areas of our intersections. So when people approach the stoplight, they're not descending down a 5% grade and having to stop coming to the stoplight. So the guidance is 3% max through your full expected queue length at the intersection.
I assume that you have screens coming that tell us what
Yep.
those are.
I'll do that at the end. Yep. Certainly.
We like pictures.
Yep. Yep. So now that we have these 5, it will go into what we call the level 2 alternatives evaluation. This is much more rigorous. We get into traffic analysis, travel time, origin, destination, what is happening between the baseline and this proposed alternative, and how does it score against the needs that we have for it. So a few of the things up there, the full traffic analysis and modeling, we'll do the origin, destination. Brad and Eric have been working on some initial stuff with the Placer AI that LADEC has been using to get us an understanding of how do people get to Gov Foods, how do people get the Fleet Farm, and then how do these alternatives change that traffic pattern? So we can understand that and evaluate the impacts and positives and negatives of each alternative. That's interesting data, something that Midnight uses a similar product called Streetlight, but this is more in-depth and has some additional data that will be helpful. The alternatives that we're developing them in 3 dimensions, so at the open house we'll be able to provide the pictures, as you say, we'll be able to provide some 3-dimensional views of each of these alternatives, because it's hard to imagine standing out there and seeing the bridge 30 feet in the air over the railroad and how all that ties down. So that'll be part of that. We'll have cost estimates, and then as part of that level 2, it will guide us towards a preferred alternative. The open house, we won't be presenting a preferred alternative, we're presenting the results of the level 2 evaluation and taking feedback from the public on what came out of that analysis. So I won't go through this. This was just intended to show all the criteria that we do at level 2. It's very thorough. Again, as Eric mentioned, it's an FHWA process. We have to consider everything when we go through it. So these were the primary needs that we had, primary and secondary, but you get into a lot of different things. So wetlands, floodplain impacts, historic archaeological impacts of each alternative. One may or may not get into something like that. So all of these have to be evaluated. Noise, we've already done noise collection out there on how the change from existing condition to proposed is going to affect traffic noise to the surrounding properties. All things we're required to evaluate as we work through it. We even get, we look at each alternative and how the snowmobile, there's snowmobile trail through there. So we'll look at how each alternative impacts the snowmobile access as well. So a few things I want to note, these are going to come to the forefront as everybody looks at alternatives and we start expanding this out into full public view. There are some major design challenges. As I mentioned, this is one of the most challenging ones I've worked with, but the railroad is our major challenge. The height of that, we have to have 23.5-foot clearance from the top of the railroad tracks to the bottom of the bridge. A typical highway bridge is 16.5. So we're adding another 7 feet to this bridge that we would on a normal interchange. So that is challenging. We have met with the railroad because it's a major cost driver for this. 2 things that came out of that, they will not entertain any of the alternatives we have that still have at-grade crossings at the railroad. There was a concept that came up about a split diamond where the ramps, 371 was separated from the railroad, but not the ramps, and that got shot down by the railroad. That's something that they wouldn't entertain. So that was good information to get back, and then we also got from them our portal width and how long our bridge is going to be, because that's a huge driver in how thick our bridge is going to be. We had originally started preliminary concepts at an 8-foot thick bridge, and we're down to 5 now, based on these conversations. So that was very helpful in the whole grand scheme. The Excelsior intersection profile, that's obviously a challenge. It's very close to 210, and when we're now going to be roughly 28 feet, the highway level over the railroad. Excelsior's not that far away, and so as I mentioned in the alternatives, it's very hard to get back down to Excelsior in that short a distance. Elder and Cypress, they are also fairly close, and so when we look at some of these alternatives, you'll see if we put ramps, highway ramps on 210, where you come off 371 and you go down on the ramps, those ramps extend to those intersections, and you're going to start restricting certain movements from 371 to these intersections with any of those alternatives. So that's a challenge because of the proximity of the intersection. So these are kind of the main ones that, as we brainstorm, we kept getting meeting some headwinds on and trying to solve. So this is stuff we'll bring to the open house and stuff as well, as why those are challenges. And then I just note on the level 2, we'll have a detailed layout, a detailed description of how that plays out for each alternative and those challenges. Got this slide in here because this is probably one of the main questions we got at the open house, and we'll continue to get this, is what about traffic during construction and detours? And at the level 1 screening, we don't consider impacts for detours and construction between each alternative. We do look at it at level 2. You know, how easy is this to build? How easy is this to maintain traffic? And then once we get to the point where we've selected a preferred alternative, we'll drill down into how do you actually build this, maintain traffic, and what are the impacts. So that's the timeline for that. We always get the question, so I don't want to just hit it head on. Next step, that's for you, Eric.
Good, thank you. Yeah, so we've kind of mentioned it here, we've actually set the date, so I'll kind of work backwards, but we've got our room reserved and are targeting, I guess, February 12th for our second open house. Similar format to the last one is what we anticipate, and that's a way that we can start bringing these alternatives out in detail. What we've been talking a lot about doing is trying to do this in a way that's, it's difficult sometimes to look at these alternatives and get up to speed right away on what's good about them, what's not so good about, what are you sacrificing. Not everybody's dealing with, again, a 30-foot grade raise and the different configurations, these wild kind of alternative interchanges are not something that we're looking at every day either. We want to make sure that people have an informed view of them. One idea we have to be able to do that is to try to use some of the technology we have available to us. So we've got a website out right now. We've got a video that had a recording of everything that we presented at the open house, but we're sure that everybody got the information if they weren't there, or just got the full. Open houses are like that, where it's like sometimes you talk to one person for 10 minutes and you don't. Not everybody gets the equal information. So we want to try to do something like that again, and maybe even precede the open house with some information on these alternatives that can lead people through them and lead people through what the trade-offs are and what just how they work really. That's what we're looking at here in the new year. We'd like to get something like that out, tentatively in January, I guess, and then we'll have our second open house at MnDOT headquarters. And actually, we do have one next step before that. So we'll be meeting with, giving a similar presentation on what we went through tonight. We'll be meeting with the chamber next week over 2 sessions, giving sort of the same kind of background to the businesses there, and giving very similar presentation. Much of these slides will be used again, so that we can sort of start engaging the local businesses in the area too, of just how we're going to work our way through this process and what that schedule for their engagement looks like too. So that'll be occurring next Wednesday and Thursday. So, and then this is I guess a QR code to our website. That's something we will be using as we move forward. We'll just house the videos that we're putting out and continue to take feedback. That'll get used all the way through construction. So as much as we can kind of get that out in front of people, I know we've got partners in that will be good. That'll be a good source of information for folks.
I can go through the 5 alternatives.
Yeah. We can get those
If there's any questions prior to that?
pictures before you go.
I was just gonna ask if you got the pictures you wanted.
Yeah, I'll do that now.
Because I didn't see them.
All right, so I'll just roll through these. We've got these, the reason they're not part of the main presentation is, if we send out that presentation or put it on the website, we don't want the alternatives in there yet. We're still in the heat of the battle of designing, doing the geometrics and making it all work and cleaning up the fine details. So this is the DDI. This is the one that has moved forward from that initial study. that was done previously. So this has a diverging diamond on 371 orange on these layouts are bridges. I always forget that usually only a small handful of people know these colors by what they mean, but we do go over to 371, the railroad and 210, and then also over Excelsior. And so this particular alternative, because we need a flat spot over for that diverging diamond, does not allow us to get down in time to Excelsior to put in a signal with this alternative. It just doesn't geometrically work. So you would have a bridge at Excelsior at this particular alternative.
The signals, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it is two signals with their coordinated signals. They're flopping over to the other side. I guess the nearest example would be the one on 15.
Yep. Same color.
They're a more efficient signal than your typical signal because it allows you to take both a free right and a free left the way that the signals are coordinated. So flopping you over that other side, you can make that movement free. And that's one of the benefits of something like this.
Can you go back to the overall
Yep.
real quick? Since we don't have any handouts. He's gonna print them and sell them.
Yeah. So this is a good one to point out.
Hey, I'll sell them to you later.
Yeah. This is a good one to point out in that slide about geometric challenges. So the alternatives that have ramps on, that come off 371 to 210. So if you look at this southeast corner, for example, and you're heading east on 210, this is a merge condition. You will not be able to merge over and get into the left lane to Cypress. So in this particular alternative, as we score it and look through on the level 2 analysis, and even at the level 1, this does have local access restrictions, the way it plays out. So those are one of the designs. The proximity of that intersection makes this alternative a little more challenging from that perspective.
You guys have driven this on the weekend.
Yeah.
I know people can make that.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
We want them to do it safely.
Fair enough.
All right, so the next one is a single point. This one is in the middle of being colored, but similar concept, except we put everything into a single point, and this is what we just did in Elk River. We converted all those signals into single point intersections. So everybody comes to one point. There's one signal on top of the bridge. This allows us to compress the footprint of the interchange and allows that profile of 371 to start coming down quicker. So this is why this one allows the potential for a signal at Excelsior with a 3% grade, because we are able to reduce that footprint of this single point.
So are your two bridges at the same height, or do you come down to the 210 bridge?
It does come down, but it doesn't come down, I mean, ideally, you'd like to come down to the clearance, all the clearance that you would actually need, but it comes down a little bit. We're cresting right over the railroad, so we're still in that vertical curve. The intersection, we like to keep it about no more than 2%, 1.5 would be nice. So we hold that through that intersection, and then we turn it down to Excelsior as fast as we get that 3%.
Okay.
Again, this one, anytime we put ramps on from 371 to 210, we deal with the proximity of Elder and Cypress, causes challenges. And just to tie this to the level 2 screening, each of these alternatives will get a full traffic analysis, so you'll be able to see the results of how does traffic operate, what's the level of service of this, how is traffic moving around, getting from Costco to Fleet Farm, or how are they doing that, and then also how's the regional traffic, how is that working through here, so both perspectives. So folded diamond, this one, what this does is this is probably the one that's closest to a traditional interchange that people see. We got 2 loop ramps, and we got traditional ramps on the north side. This requires a bridge at Excelsior to do this, because you'll have on ramps and off ramps that are going across that bridge. This is the button hook. And so the concept of this is we use, they look, obviously, they call them button hooks because that's what this looks like. They're short radius curves that come off and on the main line, and they go into a roundabout on the side, and then the traffic disperses, whether they were going to 210, whether they wanted to go to Excelsior, or any local connections. So this alternative provides access locally in this area. We have acceleration and deceleration lanes all along 371 because these curves are very low speed.
So on
Can
that
you
one,
explain how they come back onto 210?
Yeah, so if you were, let's just say you were going westbound on 210 and you wanted to go south on 371, you would make a right here, you'd come around, and then you'd come on 371. If you were going north on 371 and you wanted to go to Cup Foods, you would exit on the right, you go through the roundabout, 2 roundabouts, go under the bridge, and then head over to the frontage road.
And through the third round.
And the 3rd roundabout, yep.
Those aren't 90-degree corners on 210, though. I mean,
so that's what I was gonna bring up, so there needs to be some type of intersection control, or some type of intersection control is needed at the intersections to 210 where those ramps connect, so that could either be a signal or a roundabout.
Or,
so if I'm going eastbound on 210 from the west,
Yep.
go under 371, I can make a left turn there.
Yep. And then if you want to go on 371, you would go this way through the roundabout. If you wanted to go to Excelsior from 210, you head here. So if you're going east on 210 and you want to go to Excelsior, you never have to get on 371. You would use this frontage road system.
And I can also, before I get to 371, take a left.
You can, you can either go up to Excelsior or you can go south on 371, yeah. These are full intersections here. Like in this scenario with signals, the reason that's not all colored is because we really, in theory, wouldn't need to reconstruct any more of 210 than what we're showing in yellow to make this work. We use the existing infrastructure to do it.
Would that make a bigger conflict at Elder?
Elder has to go away in that concept. right?
Yep, and where Elder sits today, that would no longer be there with this concept.
Either way.
Either way, yeah. All the alternatives where Elder sits today, none of the alternatives keep Elder where it's at today.
I mean, you can't even do rights onto Elder.
Not at this location, no.
And the 2 rectangles in yellow, those are completely free, no signal?
There'd be signals here, or roundabouts. There'll be sub-alternatives. We haven't done the traffic analysis, that's part of level 2. So we'll look at the impacts of a signal at these or roundabouts, and whether or not they make sense.
It's kind of close for signals on 210.
What makes them work is you've gotten rid of the conflict with 371 traffic. Once you've disconnected that traffic from 210, these signals will likely operate pretty well. What causes a lot of the delay of the signal today is the through volumes conflicting with each other and the large east and north lefts. But once you get rid of the 371 traffic out of that conflict matrix, you're going to get a lot of, the heavy movement is eastbound and northbound.
So those are going to be basically automatic left turn signals.
You're going to get a lot of green time for your left turns. A lot going on that one. So this is the quadrant. So this takes that folded diamond, but we use more of a button hook configuration, which and then we have acceleration and deceleration lanes again on 371. There's a bridge at Excelsior, and we have signals or roundabouts at the intersection here on 210. So very similar to the button hook. The difference being is these connections directly at Excelsior are no longer there, and local connections, we've drawn this up as potentially being at design. It could be at Clearwater. Those are all subsets and things we'll work through in the level 2 part of it as we get feedback and how this works. Obviously, this has right-of-way impacts, but this is, as we brainstorm through this, is how do we still provide local access in a scenario where we have this quadrant interchange. So for example, if you were going northbound, just this is usually the question on how this would work is we use the bridge at Excelsior as our, really our connection. You know, most interchanges, you'd have the bridge right here. This is just a displaced bridge really for this. So if you're going to Cup Foods and you're going north, you'll exit here, you'll come back down the front road, go under the bridge and head over to Cup Foods. You make the connection at an offset location.
The second time that might work.
And this really, when you run the profile and we have a bridge at Excelsior, design is about where 371 is going to touch down. A lot of our alternatives, as far as a vertical touchdown point, happens just south of Design Road. That's the impact of being 30 feet in the air over the railroad. So those are the 5 that we have now. Any other questions? Lots to absorb, I know.
Yeah, so this will be our task over the next, as we prepare to go into the next stage with the public, is try to figure out a way to make this, I'll bring them to completion where we can present these in a way that is accessible to folks as best we can, and then explain them. Explain the trade-offs, explain what they do, what they don't do. Have a better idea what, some of those other steps are too, is, how do they model? Just because something geometrically works, does it actually provide any benefit? Those are all things that we need to evaluate against.
So has the public seen these pictures? Not just, so they'll see them for the first time next week.
Are you doing the same presentation to the public?
To the business group, yeah, next weekend.
Can I throw out some constructive criticism?
Sure.
Cut the talking in the front half, cut that in half, and talk a lot more about the different ways in and out of each of these 5. Because that's what people are gonna be after I think the business could care less process you've been through. They can read the slide, get into the nuts and bolts of how those things work, because that's what they're really after. And all in the timeline, but, tongue in cheek, I say we like pictures. People respond to those
Sure,
pictures.
certainly. That's good feedback, thank you.
That'll be a little bit the trick of where we're at right now, is because where we're really meant to we're giving sneak peeks on this stuff both here and next week because of where we're at in development. They're not really ready to be handed over without too much guidance because they're not developed at that level yet. So that's kind of the tricky part for us is we want to be informative, be straightforward about what process these things, that these weren't just picked last night,
Right.
But also, that is the main place that we want to get this stuff out, is through those surveys and the next open house, so that'll be a bit the trick for us. Because I think you're right, I think everybody wants to land here and start evaluating them.
We could lose half of the audience.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
Yeah, no, it's good feedback.
Any other questions, comments? What are you looking for,
There's nothing looking from council. There's an opportunity to get a sneak peek of the update of the progress that's being made on the project before it gets presented to the general public, so that you had the opportunity to see it first and provide feedback to the MnDOT staff before they go next week, the 11th and 12th, I believe is the dates.
So in this proposal, on any of the 5, do any of them leave access to Elder?
Not at its current location.
Is there consideration for moving the location, or?
That's part of that there is, some of the alternatives have, and the one that was in that initial study that was done, had a relocated Elder location.
Can you show us that, or is that on?
it's on
Was that for them?
Yeah, so like this alternative here has it moved to the west. So it's the ones that have intersections on 210 and not ramps. Those allow the ability to move elder at that location that was talked about previously. When we have ramps in this location, that access would not be feasible because of these ramps and the proximity of these high-speed entrances and exits.
And also Golf Course Drive gets closed.
Yep, and golf-
Everyone with ramps.
Yep, with the ramps, these go right through the middle of Golf Course Road.
So Golf Course and 210 and Elder and 210 go away on any ramp proposal in here.
And how many of those were ramps? Two or
There's two of them.
just two of them? Okay.
Otherwise, the other three allow Fourth and Road to be moved to the west, that quarter of a mile.
Do any of the non-ramps allow golf courses to stay open?
Golf course is open here.
It's shown open in here, I don't think we've necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think we've gotten to that stage yet. You know, like, even something like that, moving another at-grade crossing with the railroad is gonna be consideration with the railroad as well.
Well, we're not.
He's asking if it's gonna stay as it is today to the north, as a three-quarter access. Or are you closing it down to a right-in, right-out, or closing it completely?
And I'm talking about golf course.
Golf course drive.
Golf course.
Golf course drive.
So is the railroad gonna have an issue with us moving Elder to Portland to down the road a bit? Or are they going to consider this a whole new, I mean, we've just spent millions with them making this island crossing. Probably 2 million. Yeah, so now we're gonna tear it out.
This should be allowed under their standards because you're gonna close the current Elder, you're gonna close 371, you're supposed to close 2 to open up a new one. It's supposed to be a 2 for 1.
So they are gonna call it a new one.
They will call a new one, just like they did, they pushed us on that, on Cypress.
Yeah, they-
And on moving Knollwood to Inglewood, they pushed us on there too. But we had showed that we had closed the existing Knollwood, and we closed all the other ones over since 1998 with MnDOT, and changed the whole corridor plan. But in this case, this is truly closing 2 existing crossings and putting in 1 new one,
You know, you
which
can almost,
should be allowed under their policy.
you can almost consider 210 closing 2, or 371 closing 2 of them since it's 4 lanes.
But it's a
They
good,
probably won't think that.
it's a very good one to bring up, Councilmember Cross, because MnDOT should ask that early on these concepts, is the railroad gonna allow the 2 for 1 to move close Elder, close 371, and move Elder to the west a quarter of a mile? That should be asked early on to make sure that is their current policy when we did Inglewood and Knollwood moving.
You guys should get that in writing.
Yep. That's what they're trying to do with the other 2 issues that they got with the railroad, is they're getting them in writing. They're working on it, the height and where they can get the span of the bridge. They're working on that right now in writing.
Yeah, that was a big deal for us, even just really being able to get to the point where we could start showing sketches of things, is we really need to have some level of understanding of the railroad and what their expectation was for that, for the span of the railroad. So now we've entered into some preliminary agreement with them. They're gonna be continuing to review this project though up through final design. So they're with you every step of the way through the bridge and structure designs, as well as the early
All the way through
concepts.
construction.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of flakers out there.
Yep.
Because you are right, I think where you were headed, Councilmember Cross, is that if Elder's closed permanently and everything has to be pushed to Inglewood Drive, that's gonna change the traffic patterns a lot more drastically than just shifting it to the west a quarter of a mile.
Right. Well, at least now, if you do shift it to the west and it lines up with, it starts to line up with our backage road, then it makes sense why we did that.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, our backage road, that curvy backage road, all of a sudden makes sense. So,
Yeah.
when it goes around that.
And that's that's where it gets, something like this, you know, like Derek said, it's a pretty complicated one, so it's a little bit harder. There's no silver bullet where it's like everything just kind of stays the same, and you tweak this one thing and it all magically works. It's gonna have to, some movements are probably gonna change, you know, some. So where can we find that best balance of, that one maybe it utilizes the local system a little bit more, we're in other, under the current alternative. The current configuration, I should say.
Okay, anything to add there, Mr. County Engineer?
He's giving you a chance.
Well, I think somebody characterized it as the county, like, and the city kind of pulled the pin on their grenade and tossed it. I would say after seeing these, that absolutely should.
It's better than having it the other way.
Right. I've had the grenade before, so I appreciate these guys. Yeah, so it's a tough project.
Well, thanks for coming and explaining it, and maybe we'll see you next week too. And thanks for your time.
Remember that later. Remember that later.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks very much. All the guys, thank
I'd like to go visit my happy place about now.
See you later, Tim.
Okay, Mr. Boyd. Go for it.
Thank you, Your Honor. Counsel, make me follow that one, so I'll do my best. So, as I think most everyone's aware, the state laws changed regarding cannabis uses, and the basically local units of government, based on statute 342, are being asked to update their zoning ordinances and their city codes. So, cities and counties are going through this process to basically update regulations based on the new cannabis laws that are in place. And at your next council meeting on the 18th, December 17th rather, we'll have a recommendation on the zoning part for your action consideration. But we wanted to take opportunity tonight to just talk about some of the zoning aspects of the cannabis regulations, just to because the council hasn't had a chance to see that piece of it. We did go to the planning commission with the model ordinance, and that ordinance is attached to your work session packet this evening. So you can ask staff any questions that you have or provide any feedback that you have for us leading into your next council meeting. But really the statute is pretty much outlines a lot of mandated things that we have to do in our ordinances. There are some areas where there's some options, and those are the areas where I wanted to just kind of present to the council tonight, to just make sure the council has time to discuss those options as you're going to get a recommendation from the planning commission at your next meeting. So with regard to the options, well, I guess first of all, to back up a little bit. From a zoning perspective, there's a number of different cannabis-related business uses that we could see in the future in the city and across Minnesota. There are, and really those types of businesses boil down to, generally speaking, retail type uses and industrial type uses. Those are the primary two categories. And so from a zoning perspective, we have some choices to make with regard to where we're going to allow the various business types that we would be seeing in the future. The state law has, and the Office of Cannabis Management has provided guidance that they have 13 different license types for various types of cannabis-related businesses, where they would get their license from the state. But for us at the local level, we need to determine of those 13 different license types, where those various businesses fit within the community. We have to allow them, but we can choose where we allow them, and reasonably. So looking at those uses, we'll go through those in a bit. But in addition to the choices of zoning districts, there's a couple other options we have related to cannabis retail stores. So one of the big changes is with regard to the retail stores. Specifically, the retail stores have the option for councils to consider a cap on retail stores that's based on a population of the city. The population is 12,500 people. We're obviously under 12,500 people, so state law allows us the opportunity to place a cap just on retail stores for cannabis. There's numerous other license types that there's no ability to do a cap, but with a retail store you can. So that would mean that we would have to allow one retail store, but we wouldn't have to allow more than one until our population reached 12,501 people. And at that point, we would have to allow 2 stores. We can, of course, allow more and open it up to the market if we so chose, if we didn't want to do a cap. Just for reference for the council, the Planning Commission did recommend an ordinance with the cap in it for having one retail store. That's something you can change at a later date. You can decide to not have the cap as well. The other choice that we have to consider is if we would like any buffer requirements from the retail store. The state law allows basically a 1,000-foot buffer from schools, as well as 500-foot buffer from daycares, residential treatment facilities, and parks that have active areas with minors within parkland, basically. In looking at those options of the cap and the buffer, there's some findings that I have in the staff report as to why it was drafted the way it was with the buffers in place. The Planning Commission did recommend employing the retail store cap, so we'd have one retail store if approved, and then also the buffers to be in place. The buffers with Baxter's large commercial area, and just due to how things lay out, there'd be ample opportunity for a retail store to find lots of locations to go, even if there was no cap on the retail stores. Even with the buffers in place, there'd be lots of opportunity areas for those retail stores to be within C2 commercial, somewhere in the city away from those distances from schools and from daycare, residential treatment facilities, and public parks with areas that have larger areas of minors being within public parks. So those are the main considerations with the retail store. In terms of a zoning, from a zoning perspective, there is also the whole conversation of where these various cannabis uses would be in zoning. Just wanted to take a minute to just go through just what's in the ordinance so far. We have a number of definitions. I'm going to skip over those and just talk about the zoning for a second. So in C2 commercial, what we're looking at is allowing a cannabis retail store. Sorry, I'm getting a notification here. Cannabis retail store pursuant to the cannabis retail buffer and cannabis retail limit as allowed in state statutes. So that's what we just talked about. So under this ordinance, it would employ the buffer and the retail limit, but it would be a permitted use in C2 commercial. So that store could be anywhere in C2 commercial, provided it meets the buffer. And then
Is the cannabis delivery part of the store, is that a separate business?
it's a separate use. Yeah, it's one of the license types, and so we've added it as a number of other cities are just adding that to C2 commercial. We don't always list delivery services as a use, but they have it in their model ordinance. So
So when you have the 13 licenses, can a single business have more than one license?
Yes, yes. Also looking at C2, we also have lower potency hemp edible retailers. So a low potency hemp is already in our community. It was authorized by state law already. And so this is basically listed without any cap or distance requirements as a permitted use in C2 commercial. So when you're talking about lower potency hemp products, basically the only local control under this ordinance is to say if you're going to have retail of those products, it just needs to be in our primary C2 commercial retail zone. So the only thing we're controlling is saying you just can't sell it out of your house or in an office zone or industrial or any of those other zones. But otherwise it would be permitted use kind of across the board in our commercial district. There's another category which we're familiar with in Baxter already, and that's medical cannabis. They changed the title of it in the license category, the former medical cannabis category. All the regulations of that kind of got put in with the overall cannabis laws. So now it's called a medical cannabis combination business. And the license type at the state law for medical cannabis includes retail, but it also includes a whole bunch of different industrial aspects for that license category. But in working with the city attorney as we prepared this draft, what we tried to do is allow everything we're supposed to allow, but really tried to keep retail in the retail spaces and keep industrial in the industrial spaces. So even though state law for medical cannabis says, okay, as a business I can get a medical combination business license at the state, that includes industrial and retail type uses. We're just asking that for medical cannabis combination business to not include cultivation or manufacturing in C2 commercial. That part of, if you have that as your business, you should go to our industrial district to do those uses. And we did the kind of the opposite in industrial, which I'll show you in a minute. And this is the rest of it. This is kind of a large business world that is now going to be available within industrial, which includes cannabis micro businesses, not including retail, meso businesses, not including retail, cultivators, manufacturers, warehouse, wholesalers, transporters, testing facilities, delivery services, low potency hemp edible manufacturers, medical cannabis combination business, not including retail, all subject to Minnesota state statutes. So there's just a lot of different businesses that could be coming to Baxter that are more on the industrial side of things. I think when we evaluated the various different license types and the business types of uses, it would seem logical to staff, as well as looking at what other cities are doing, is that in the world of the industrial business uses, I think there's a lot more possibility where the city might want to establish some reasonable conditions on the industrial uses than with the one retail store or for the low potency hemp products in retail, for example. So what is drafted in this ordinance is to have these industrial uses be a conditional use in our primary industrial district, whereas the retail uses above are permitted uses. Therefore, when we get a cannabis retail store or have low potency hemp, that would not require any type of a conditional use.
So all these in the industrial that you got noted in industrial.
Yep.
Those are not walk-in. Anybody off the street can buy something there.
Right. It's more industrial use, wholesale, deliveries. Maybe they make the packaging for some sort of cannabis product. Maybe they grow plants. Indoors. There's all sorts of different business types that could end up in our industrial uses. We've now drafted that as a conditional use for any of those businesses, where the retail ones are permitted uses that could just go forward.
Seems to me like that's not backwards.
Well,
If there's no public that can walk in there and buy something, what conditions are we gonna put on it that what would we wanna restrict on an industrial manufacturing type of thing?
yeah.
if I make a package and I happen to print a leaf on it, call it cannabis for, you know, some manufacturer, now am I cannabis micro business, but I'm a printer? I mean,
That'd be based on state law, whether it reaches that threshold or not.
or
'Cause
when
they
you
have to
say
do their own.
packaging, or you mean actually putting the product in a package?
Right. I think the idea here is you're getting into potentially growing plants, processing, there could be odors, there's, what are the different things where we would want potential conditions of approval depending on, you know, small or large operations of wholesale or business to business use. I think it's probably more common just in looking at the other cities that we looked at to see the conditional use show up in the industrial than the retail side, although we saw varieties of each. So the city has freedom to look at both. The other thing, you know, they're all licensed by the state. And I think from the retail perspective, I think we have, you know, parking standards and a lot of other things built into that. There's probably, without the processing and the cultivation aspects of things, it just seemed like for us, if there's a retail store, kind of like the medical cannabis retail store, the regulations of that business are really addressed a lot with licensing. So it's more of a parking, traffic, how much activity is going to be on the site. It's kind of a parking lot in a building. But there might be conditions that we might want to establish with the retail cannabis business too. I think it was more common though to see that as a permitted use. Certainly the low potency hemp edible products, they're widespread. They're in liquor stores, they're in tobacco shops, they're in microbreweries, they're in all sorts of other places to obtain those products. So
The
that,
grocery store.
right, so it just didn't make sense at all to have that one to staff to be a conditional use.
So, a couple of questions. We just saw, what was it, a week ago, that there was a lawsuit, so now there hasn't been a lottery. We don't even know if there's gonna be a lottery. Has there been anything from the state saying when we're even gonna potentially see a retailer?
Yeah, we don't know.
Okay.
We don't know
And-
because of all that.
A word
And
from the
another
state-
one just says-
I just want
Sure.
to add to it. Word from the state is they still are intending to be beginning the process and issuing licenses after the first of the year.
Even without a lottery?
That's the message being sent out.
Yeah, and that was one of the big questions with the retail cap was, if you cap to one, how would a city decide who gets to get that store? The state does it.
Doesn't get to decide that. We
Cities
found
do.
that- We found that out at Rochester at the West, League of Minnesota Cities.
Yeah, the state decides through their own vetting.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where the lawsuit came in.
So the other, just kind of for informational purposes, this is kind of really behind the eight ball. The Mille Lacs band has a 50,000 square foot grow facility growing right now, and the potential for 5 retail stores somewhere. I mean, it's already
Yeah.
moving forward at very rapid pace.
I think the question's been asked, not by anybody here, but I think the question's been asked and not yet been answered, maybe by the state, is can a city split the difference, but not have the cap that's established by statute at 1, not have no cap, but set its own cap of 2, 3, or 4?
I think you could. We'd have to check with the city attorney, but it's a minimum. I mean, we have to allow one for our population.
Correct.
We can allow a number above that. We can cap it at 1 or have no cap. But I think to answer your question, I think we would be able to have a different amount of cap, say we wanted to set the store cap at 3. I think you'd have, based on what we're reading, I don't know why we wouldn't be able to.
I could jump in on that, that was gonna be basically my only comment is I'm a little bit uncomfortable with creating a government-created monopoly in the city and letting the state decide who gets to run that one store. And I feel like the idea of the cap was to test it. A test of 2 or 3 would make a little more sense to me in terms of letting the market do its thing rather than having a sample size of 1 in terms of the test. But
I would agree with you on that. The whole monopoly thing is
it's uncomfortable.
I think it's just worth running down, because I thought the state last time when I went to the Blade Deck annual meeting, I don't remember if it was there, but I don't know if they had an answer on, can you set your own cap versus the statutory cap or no cap?
Yeah, I mean, the cap is optional, so if you don't have a cap, you can get as many stores as the market allows, right? So, or that could be licensed. The state has its own license limits for the state for various types of license types, but I don't know why we wouldn't be able to go in between them, basically, is what you're proposing, so. If there, I mean, that type of feedback is helpful. I'll forward the planning commission's recommendation, but if there's consensus guidance for us, we can provide, alternative resolutions for the council. Obviously, it's your decision in the end with what we do with the ordinances. I guess the last piece I did want to mention, we're almost out of time to leave time for the other item, but together with the zoning piece, there's a whole licensing end that's going to come forward at your next meeting too, for your consideration at the next council meeting. So.
If we don't have one, the state picks one, is that correct? Is that?
no, the state picks one anyway. Was that the state?
The state-
picks who's gonna take it.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
So if we don't do it, they will.
They will, I think, regardless.
So according to Google and the paper in Minneapolis, the quote here is state law also allows cities to limit the number of recreational cannabis stores, though they must allow at least 1 per 2,500. So that's really the wording.
Yeah.
We didn't send it.
And that's our understanding, but we'll get that confirmation
Yeah.
and provide it to you well in advance of the meeting on the 17th.
So we will see that on the 17th.
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. Where are we at, Brad?
I can come back during the regular meeting. We're at time to adjourn this until later so we can move on to the
I
rest
think
of
we
the
just adjourn, we'll just utilize the city administrator's report.
Motion to adjourn the workshop. So moved. All in favor? Taking a quick break, we'll be right back.
This is Mike not working?
His mic is not down towards his mouth.
Shut me off.